Hey. Hey, old-timer. You missed a spot. The voice slid across the hangar floor the way oil slides across water, thin on the surface, slick underneath. Lieutenant Commander Brett Schaller stood with one shoulder against the frame of the open bay door, arms folded, a protein bar in one hand, and the particular ease of a man who has never once in his life been the person holding the mop. He was 34 years old, lean and dark-haired, with the kind of physical condition that reads as a statement of intent. His working uniform was rolled at the sleeves. His forearms were covered in the deliberate ink of a man who chose his tattoos to be seen. He was looking at the wet streak of floor that curved 3 feet to the left of where the old man's mop had just passed. Right there. Schaller pointed with the protein bar. You see it? That smear. Right there, Pops. The old man did not look up. His name was Walter Pruitt, and he was 81 years old. He wore the gray uniform of the base custodial contractor, cotton work pants, a button-up shirt the color of old concrete, boots that had been resoled and re-resoled until only the soles were original. He was not large. He had the compact, worn-down build of a man who had once been something else entirely and had since become quiet about it. His hair was white and close-cropped. His hands on the mop handle were a map of wrinkles and age spots, the knuckles like river stones, the grip loose and unhurried and perfectly steady. He finished the stroke he was on, then started a new one, moving the mop in the long, overlapping arcs of someone who has done this before and will do it again and has made a kind of peace with the repetition. Did you hear me? Schaller said. I heard you, Walter said. His voice was a low, dry rasp. The kind that sounds like it's been through things that squeezed the ornamentation out of it and left only the essential instrument behind. He did not look at Schaller. He began a new arc with the mop. There's still a smear, Schaller said. He pushed off the doorframe and stepped into the hangar with the deliberate leisure of a man entering a space he owns. I need this floor clean for the CO's walkthrough at 1400. That means actually clean, not just pushed around. The hangar was a cathedral of organized readiness. 2 MH-60 Seahawks parked in precise alignment, their rotors folded and tied, their fuselages gleaming under fluorescent tubes that hummed steadily in the rafters. The air smelled of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel, and the faint ghost of salt water that came off anything that lived within a quarter-mile of the Pacific. Somewhere deeper in the bay, the low mechanical sound of a helicopter being serviced, the occasional ring of a wrench, the hiss of a torque tool. An aviation tech in a brown float coat walked through the background with a clipboard and did not look up. 3 junior operators stood near the far wall, in the process of performing a gear check on a rack of dive equipment. They were not watching. Then they were. Schaller moved closer to Walter, reaching the 2-foot radius that carries its own message. You know what this facility is, right? He said. He had lowered his voice slightly, which made it worse, not better. This is a naval special warfare hangar. These birds have carried my team into denied territory on 6 continents. We don't have smear marks on the floor. He paused. How long you been on this job, old-timer? They train you on what a mop is for? A sound from the gear rack, something between a breath and the absence of one. Walter Pruitt wrung out the mop over the bucket with the same deliberate economy of motion he brought to everything. He set it aside. He pulled a clean, dry cloth from his belt and crouched, slowly, with the careful geometry of a man managing old knees, and wiped the smear off the floor by hand. He stood back up. The smear was gone. There, he said. Schaller stared at him for a moment. Then he looked at the 3 operators by the gear rack, and the look he gave them was an invitation to appreciate what they were watching. One of them, a petty officer first class named Danny Okafor, did not take the invitation. He looked back at his gear. Got a smart mouth on you, Schaller said, returning to Walter. For a janitor. Just a mop man, Walter said. Right, Schaller walked a slow half-circle around him, the way a man walks when he wants to be looked at while he looks. He came around Walter's right side and then stopped. His eyes dropped to the left side of Walter's neck, visible above the collar of the work shirt, just below the jawline, where a tattoo ran in faded blue-black ink along the tendon. It was old. The skin had loosened around it over the decades, softening the edges, giving it the look of something pressed into the flesh from the inside rather than applied to the outside. The design was compact and precise. A trident, crossed over an anchor and a flintlock pistol above a spread eagle, not large, not decorative. Placed there once, a long time ago, and never discussed. Schaller leaned in. "What is that?" he said, not sharp now. Something more unsettled was moving behind the words. He reached out with 2 fingers and touched the tattoo on Walter's neck. The hangar disappeared. The fluorescent hum cut out. The hydraulic smell and the jet fuel smell and the salt-tinged Pacific air all vanished in a single frame, replaced by something ancient and total. The thick, wet heat of a Philippine jungle, the smell of red mud and vegetation decomposing in layers 100 feet deep, and underneath it all, blood, the particular iron sweetness of it, specific and absolute. He was 22 years old. He was lying on his back in the mud on the bank of a river that had no name on any map available to the public, and the man who had been lying next to him 30 seconds ago was no longer moving. His name had been Corporal Aurelio Santos, and he had been 20 years old, and he had been the best swimmer Walter had ever seen in his life. And he was gone. Shot. Twice. It had happened so fast that the sound of it was still echoing off the tree line when Walter understood what the sound meant. 14 of them had gone in. The extraction point was 3 kilometers north. The river was compromised. The radio was Santos's, and Santos was gone. Walter had been in naval special warfare for 8 months. He was the youngest member of the team and the oldest member of the team, a chief petty officer named Victor Lund, had done something on the second day of training that Walter had never forgotten. He had pulled Walter aside after the evolution where 3 men quit and said, quietly and without ceremony, "You're going to be fine. I know it, and you don't, yet. When this is over, you'll know it too." Victor Lund was somewhere ahead in the dark, rallying the remains of the element. Walter got up out of the mud with Santos's radio. He ran. He did not think about whether his legs would hold. He did not think about the 2 men who had gone down at the insertion point, or the 4 who had peeled off to create a diversion and who may or may not have made it to the secondary rally point. He thought about the extraction point. He thought about the frequency. He thought about the voice he needed to reach, and he ran through the dark toward it. They made the extraction point with 7 men and the radio. 6 others came out in the following 72 hours through 3 separate contingency routes. 1 did not come out at all. His name had been Petty Officer 3rd Class Marcus Lee, age 23, from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who had wanted to be a high school football coach when he was done with the Navy and had a particular way of laughing, loud and sudden and completely unguarded, that had made the whole team laugh with him every time, without knowing why. 3 days after the extraction, in a staging room in Subic Bay, Victor Lund had sat next to Walter with a cup of coffee and said, "The mark we got means we finished it. It doesn't mean it was clean. Nothing real is clean." He had pressed his thumb against the fresh ink on his own neck, the same ink they all wore now, and said, "This is for the ones who came home, the ones who didn't already have their names where they need to be." Walter had looked at the tattoo on his own neck in a mirror later that night and had not been able to explain exactly what he felt, only that it was not pride. Pride was too small a word and too clean. The hangar came back. The fluorescent hum. The hydraulic smell. Schaller's 2 fingers still resting against the ink on his neck. Walter turned his head slightly, and Schaller dropped his hand. The junior operators at the gear rack had stopped working. Danny Okafor had not moved in 30 seconds. He was looking at the tattoo on the old man's neck. He was 26 years old, a petty officer first class with 2 deployments, and his father had been a Navy man, and his grandfather had been a Navy man, and his grandfather had spoken once in Walter Okafor's entire remembered life about the operations out of Subic Bay, spoken about them in the kind of voice you use for things that cannot be fully said, and then had never spoken of them again. Danny Okafor stared at the faded trident on the old man's neck and felt something cold move through him. He set down the dive regulator he was holding. He said something quiet to the operator next to him, who glanced up and then looked away again without registering it. Okafor walked toward the side corridor leading to the administrative spaces, and once he was around the corner and out of Schaller's sightline, he broke into a controlled jog. The base operator connected him in 7 seconds. "Master Chief Petty Officer Granger's office," said a yeoman. "I need to speak to Master Chief Granger," Okafor said. "This is PO1 Okafor, Hangar Bay 3. There's a man in the hangar right now. His name is Walter Pruitt. He's a custodial contractor. He's got—" Okafor paused. He was not entirely sure how to say the next part in a way that conveyed the specific weight of what he had seen. "He's got a trident tattoo on his neck. The old design. The pre-83 design. Master Chief, it's faded green-black, it's placed right, I mean the placement and the design, everything about it, the yeoman had gone silent on the other end. Not put on hold silent. Not transferred you silent. Silent. Then, say that name again, Walter Pruitt." The pause that followed stretched for 5 seconds. Then 6. Then the voice that returned was the Master Chief's own, and it was nothing like the professional neutral instrument of a man who handles administrative calls. "Where exactly in Hangar Bay 3? "Near the east entrance, Master Chief. Lieutenant Commander Schaller has been— Don't let anyone touch that man." The words arrived in a flat, urgent line, stripped of everything except necessity. "You hear me, Okafor? You go back in there and you stay within 10 feet of him and you don't let anyone touch him. I will be there in 4 minutes. Aye, Master Chief." And Okafor. A pause. The barest pause. "If the name Walter Pruitt means what I think it means, you did the right thing calling." The line closed. Master Chief Petty Officer James Granger was 51 years old and had spent 28 years in naval special warfare, and in those 28 years there were exactly 3 names he would have stood up from any meeting, any meal, any conversation on Earth to honor. He was halfway down the corridor outside his office before the door finished closing behind him. He stopped at the duty desk and said, very quietly, to his yeoman, "Find Commander Reyes. Tell him to meet me in Hangar Bay 3 right now. Tell him it's Walter Pruitt." The yeoman looked up. The yeoman had been working for Granger for 2 years and had never seen that expression on the Master Chief's face. "Walter, just find Reyes," Granger said. "He'll know." He was already moving. Commander Isabel Reyes was in a planning session with 4 senior operators when her yeoman opened the door without knocking and bent low and said 2 words in her ear. She stood up mid-sentence. She said, "We're done for today," and walked out of the room before anyone could ask why. She had heard the name Walter Pruitt once, from her own commanding officer, who had heard it from his, in the manner of things passed down not through paperwork, but through the specific gravity of people who know what something cost. She took the stairs. In Hangar Bay 3, Lieutenant Commander Brett Schaller was reaching his full altitude. He had moved to within arm's length of Walter Pruitt again, and his voice had taken on the particular resonance of a man who has decided that a small resistance is a personal affront. He was talking about standards. About what this facility represented. About the difference between people who had earned the right to be in a place and people who were there in a support capacity. And he used the phrase support capacity with a specific emphasis that was intended to land. And it landed. And Walter Pruitt received it the way a river receives a stone, without changing direction, without altering depth, with only the smallest disturbance on the surface that closed almost immediately. "You want to tell me where you got that tattoo?" Schaller said, reaching for the neck again. "Because I know what that design is, and I know what you're not." His fingertips brushed the faded ink. A door at the far end of the hangar opened. Then a second one, simultaneously, on the opposite wall. They came from both sides. Master Chief Granger came through the east door first, moving at a pace that was not quite a run and was emphatically not a stroll. Commander Reyes came through the west access corridor with two men behind her in working dress blues. They converged on the center of the hangar floor with the coordinated efficiency of people who did not need to discuss where they were going. Schaller turned. His hand dropped from Walter's neck. Granger did not look at Schaller. He did not look at the operators by the gear rack. He did not look at anything except the old man in the gray custodial uniform standing next to the mop bucket with the faded trident tattoo on his neck. He stopped 4 feet away. He looked at Walter Pruitt for a long moment. The white hair, the worn hands, the eyes that were gray and clouded at the edges by age but possessed a depth behind the cloud like looking down a very deep and very cold well. A depth that had not diminished with the decades, but only grown quieter about itself. Granger came to attention. The salute he rendered was the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute Lieutenant Commander Brett Schaller had ever witnessed in his career. Crisper than anything at a formal ceremony, more deliberate than anything on a parade ground. And it was directed at the old man holding the mop handle. Granger's right hand was rigid at the brow, elbow perfectly parallel, spine locked. He held it. Commander Reyes, arriving at his shoulder, looked at Walter Pruitt and rendered the same. The two men who had come in behind her did the same. 4 salutes, held in absolute silence, in a SEAL hangar, directed at a man in a gray custodial uniform. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound in the building. Walter Pruitt set the mop handle against the bucket. He raised his right hand and returned each salute in turn, slowly, without ceremony, with the gravity of a man who has been doing this for long enough that it means something precise and unreduced to him. He lowered his hand. Schaller had not moved in approximately 15 seconds. Commander Reyes turned to him. When she spoke, her voice was even, and that evenness was more devastating than any sharpness would have been. "Lieutenant Commander," she said, "you are relieved of the CO's walkthrough this afternoon. Report to my office at 1500. She paused just long enough for the shape of what was coming to be felt. "We're going to talk about what the trident means." Schaller said, "Yes, Commander." Master Chief Granger produced a folded sheet from his breast pocket. He had prepared it in the 90 seconds between leaving his office and entering the hangar, pulling the file he had kept on a personal thumb drive for 11 years. The file every Master Chief in Naval Special Warfare passed quietly to his successor, not through official channels, but through the unofficial custodianship of names that should not be forgotten. "I want to read something," Granger said. He was speaking to the operators at the gear rack, to the aviation tech who had set down his clipboard, to Schaller, to everyone. so that we all understand who has been keeping the floor clean in our building. His voice carried without effort. Walter James Pruitt, United States Navy, retired Master Chief Petty Officer, entered service 1961. Selected for Underwater Demolition Team Training, class of 1963, Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, this base, graduating in the top 4% of his class. Granger paused, assigned to UT-12. Then, following the stand-up of the Naval Special Warfare Community in 1962, reselected and assigned to SEAL Team 1, first-generation SEAL. He let that land. 7 combat deployments. 3 in Vietnam, 2 in the Philippines, 2 classified locations still redacted in his service record. The hangar was completely still. Awards: Navy Commendation Medal with Valor, 1966, Bronze Star with Valor Device, 1968, Silver Star, 1969, for actions in Kungnam Province in which Master Chief Pruitt, while serving as team lead on a direct action mission, maintained radio communication with fleet assets and coordinated the extraction of 11 personnel under sustained enemy fire after his primary communicator was killed, sustaining a fragmentation wound to the left forearm in the process. Granger turned the page. Purple Heart, 1969. Second Purple Heart, 1971. Navy Cross, 1970. For actions in the Philippine archipelago during a classified operation in which Master Chief Pruitt, as the senior surviving element member following catastrophic personnel losses at the insertion point, assumed command of the remaining force, completed the mission objective, and recovered 6 personnel to the extraction point over a period of 72 hours through denied territory without resupply or air support. The aviation tech had set down his torque wrench. The Navy Cross citation, Granger said, and his voice lowered by 1 register, contains a line that I want to read verbatim, because I have read it many times, and it does not get smaller with reading. He looked at the page. Quote, Master Chief Pruitt's actions on this occasion reflect the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service and stand as a permanent standard against which acts of valor may be measured. End quote. Schaller's jaw was working slightly, as if he were trying to find language and discovering the cupboard was bare. The tattoo on his neck, Granger said, is a first-generation SEAL trident, applied in 1963. One of fewer than 40 men alive today who carry that exact design, in that exact placement, from that era. He folded the paper. The enemy had a name for him during his Vietnam deployments. They called him Con Ma Long, the silent ghost. Because his team's operations left no trace, no witnesses, no pattern. He simply appeared, and then he was gone, and something had changed. Granger looked at Schaller for a moment. He has been volunteering his time cleaning this hangar on Tuesday mornings for the past 3 years. He asked for nothing in return. He did not announce himself. He showed up, and he worked, and he went home. No one in the hangar said anything. Walter Pruitt picked up his mop. I've got the east corner still to do, he said quietly, and he went back to work. The administrative consequences for Schaller were handled without drama. A formal counseling entered into his service record, a mandatory review board that was neither punitive nor comfortable, and an assignment to a mentorship program that paired junior officers with senior enlisted veterans for a period of 1 month. It was not designed to humiliate. It was designed to teach. The difference between a man who has been given power and a man who has earned authority was the curriculum, and it was not a short course. When the walkthrough ended and the hangar was clearing, Walter Pruitt wrung out the mop for the last time and loaded his equipment onto the cart. He was preparing to push it toward the service corridor when he heard boots on the clean floor behind him. Schaller stopped 6 feet away. He had taken off his rank insignia at some point in the past hour. Or rather, he was still wearing it, but it did not seem to be doing anything for him anymore. He looked like a man who had just had a conversation with gravity and lost. "Mr. Pruitt," he said. The Mr. was different from the Pops and the old-timer and the janitor. It cost something to say. Walter looked at him. "I owe you an apology," Schaller said. "Not a formal one. I mean, I'll do whatever the formal process requires. But I wanted to say it to you. The way I spoke to you today," he stopped. He looked at the floor between them, then back up. "I looked at you and I saw a man with a mop and I had already decided everything. And I was wrong. And I am sorry." Walter was quiet for a moment. He rested his hands on the cart handle. "You know what I thought about?" he said, his voice its familiar dry rasp, carrying no judgment, "when I was running through that jungle in 1970, carrying a dead man's radio?" He did not wait for Schaller to answer. "Nothing. I thought about nothing, except the next step. The next tree. The next breath." He paused. "The job in front of me." He looked at Schaller with those gray, deep water eyes. "You've got the training and the fire and the years ahead of you. Don't spend them looking at what people are holding. Look at what they've already carried." He pushed the cart forward. "Door," he said simply, and Schaller stepped aside and held it open, and Walter Pruitt rolled his equipment through into the corridor beyond without looking back. Schaller stood in the open doorway for a long moment, holding it out of habit, long after it needed holding. 11 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning at just past 7, Lieutenant Commander Brett Schaller was the first person in Hangar Bay 3 when Walter Pruitt arrived with his cart. He had coffee, 2 cups, from the good machine in the officer's break room, not the one in the ready room. He held one out without making a speech about it. Walter took it. He looked at the cup. He looked at Schaller. "You're here early," he said. "I wanted to know," Schaller said, "about the Philippines operation. If you're willing to talk about it." Walter considered him for a moment with those deep water eyes. Then he unclipped the mop from the cart. "Start on the west side with me," he said. "I'll talk while we work." Schaller looked at the mop. Then he reached past Walter, lifted the second mop from the cart hooks, and followed the old man toward the west wall. There are men like Walter Pruitt moving quietly through the world every day, mopping floors, bagging groceries, sitting on park benches, holding doors. They carry what they carry without displaying it, without requiring your recognition, without making the terms of their sacrifice part of any transaction with the present. They were forged in circumstances that most of us will never approach, and they came home from those circumstances and became ordinary. And in becoming ordinary, they became something more extraordinary than the war ever made them, because the war had a framework and a uniform and a mission. What they became afterward required nothing but choice. They chose quiet. They chose service. They chose to show up on Tuesday mornings with a mop. The real ones never tell you who they are. They just keep the floor clean. If you were moved by Walter's story of quiet courage and timeless service, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes. Word count, approximately 3,980 words.